In this lesson, I'll be talking about observation, but observation within the context of ethnographies, observation as a research method. I feel like observation is one of the least understood research methods out there. And why? Because whenever people are asked to observe, they feel like all they have to do is go somewhere and sit and basically write down whatever they see. So they don't think about the process as a systematic and a rigorous one, and they don't even consider it a scientific process. So in my opinion, observation is the exact opposite. I think it is both a humanistic and a scientific research method, and it can be rigorous if it is well done, systematic, and to a certain extent replicable. And if a research method, in my opinion, meets these criteria, I think it can be called a scientific research method. So observation is a valid scientific research method. Now, in the context of ethnographies, we tend to talk about participant observation. And in this lesson, that's basically what I'll be focusing on, participant observation. So the goals of this lesson, the objectives will be to define what participant observation is and to learn a few techniques that are involved in participant observation and also being able to describe the process. Okay. So participant observation really involves immersing yourself within a particular culture or subculture for days, weeks, months, and even years. So imagine, for example, that you have to study the culture of a Native American tribe. So how long do you think that process will take? I'm guessing years, because observing in such a milieu would not only, require you to be able to understand the culture, but also learn the language to be able to access the culture. And whenever we're talking about language learning, we are sure that this process will take years. And in some cases, so well-documented cases, researchers have immersed themselves for years in order to be able to study a culture they were not familiar with. But in the context of our ethnographies, what I will even call mini ethnographies, and because of the length of the semester, only about 4 months, so you would only have to immerse yourself for about 2 months or so within your subculture to be able to get an understanding of the symbolic world of the people studied. So I would say that observation in this context would not only involve immersing yourself within the culture, but also learning to remove yourself so that you can intellectualize and process what you've seen and heard so that you can put it into perspective and write about it convincingly. So the process is not just one of immersion, but one where you have the ability to remove yourself and to critically think about what you've seen and heard. Okay, so now we'll talk about entering the field. So you want to conduct observation, however, you have to first enter the field before you can conduct observation. So let's talk a little bit about that process of entering the field. I would say that you need 3 things. So you need to have formal documentation, you need to talk to gatekeepers, and you need to build rapport. So those are the 3 essential components of entering the field. So let's talk about formal documentation. So before you conduct any kind of observation, it is always best to have proper documentation with you. Why? Because that documentation will really protect you just in case you run into problems. So the 2 most important things I would say, kind of documents you would need in that process, would be what I call a letter of permission. So make sure you talk to an authoritative figure within the subculture way ahead of time and get a letter of permission. So whenever you go to observe, you take that letter of permission with you, so that if anybody were to ask you, what are you doing here? You can just say, I'm conducting research, I have permission to conduct the research here. Here is a letter of permission from an authority within the subculture. So that counts. That letter of permission will protect you. Okay? So the number 2 document you really need is an informed consent. So when you're observing, the whole process won't just be observation, but sometimes you have to talk to people, you have to ask questions. And if you want to use those questions or responses to those questions as part of your data, you will need to get an informed consent from the people you are interviewing, the people you are asking questions to. So they need to give you their written consent saying that you can use their words or their pictures in your study. So that also counts. It is also meant to protect you, just in case you run into problems in the future where you publish somebody's video online and they find out and they come after you. You can just say, oh, when I was conducting the research, you did give me your permission to use your words and your picture, and I have the signed informed consent with me. So these documents will really protect you. So again, I'll repeat, you need formal documentation, and I would suggest having a letter of permission and informed consent. So number 2 is talk to gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are very important in the process of observation. You can't just show up at a particular place and start observing, because you can run into problems. So you need to make sure you know who are the people in charge, who are the people who can grant you access to the subculture, and you have to talk to those people. So the advantage of talking to gatekeepers is that they can introduce you to other members within the culture. They can know the other members. They can let the other members know that you will be coming to conduct observation, and that will facilitate the whole process. Now, the third aspect is build rapport. So gatekeepers can only take you so far. On top of that, you'll be interacting with other insiders within the culture. And for you to truly discover every corner, every aspect of that culture, you need to be able to develop a relationship with the members. So the better you are at developing relationship with the members, the better you'll be able to discover more about the culture. So again, the process of entering the field involves 3 things. Have formal documentation, that's 1. Talk to gatekeepers, that's 2. And build rapport, that's 3. Okay, now let's talk about some of the skills that are involved in observation. So the first of the skills I will introduce you to is called learning to look beyond the obvious. Now, that's easily said, it's not easily done. Indeed, it will take time and practice to be able to just develop that. So for that end, I have a little exercise that we'll be doing in a minute, where you will see a series of images and you have to look at them carefully to be able to uncover their multi-layered hidden meaning. So they're not just simple images, so they will give you a first impression, but you have to go beyond that first impression to really discover what is hidden within each one of them. So that will be our first activity. So these images were of course purposefully crafted to have hidden things within them. And because of that, we cannot necessarily compare the process of uncovering these hidden things within the images to the process of conducting observation. However, I believe there are some important parallels to be drawn here. So the first impression you get from looking at these images is comparable to what a normal observer would see while looking at your field site. And the second impression you get, so when you actually took time and realized that there were hidden things within these images, is comparable to the process of conducting real observation. So when observing, you have to learn to look beyond the obvious. That is the only thing that will make what you're doing research. Because with research, you have to be able to look beyond the obvious. You have to be able to understand things at a much deeper level than what other people would normally be able to. So what I would say and actually encourage you to do is spend more time observing. Observe, but spend more time observing. Pay attention to details. Pay attention to patterns. Develop that critical eye. So the second most important skill you need to have as an ethnographer is building explicit awareness. So what does that mean? It simply means, again, learning to pay attention to details. So in order to help you with that, I have a little exercise I want you to do. So for the next 5 minutes, you take a piece of paper or on your computer, describe the process of doing laundry. So take about 5 minutes and do this. Describe the process of doing laundry. And if you finish, I want you to get in groups of 3 and compare your process to that of 2 other of your classmates. And as you compare your processes, so try to see what details you had and they did not have, and what details you missed. So this should give you an idea of how you were good at paying attention to details. So if you feel like you did not have as much detail as them, so maybe you need to work a little bit more on that. And if you were the one in the group to have as much detail, so you can still build on that skill. So take about 5 minutes and do this exercise. So another skill I would emphasize while observing is learning to look from multiple perspectives, and that's very important. So by multiple perspectives, within a culture, you will have people with different roles. So you have to learn to look from their different perspectives, but you also have to learn to look from an insider perspective and an outsider perspective. So imagine that you're coming to observe this class. So the class is your subculture. Okay, so when you come to class, you can sit where other students sit and observe. So you're getting the perspective of students, because what will be the focal point at that moment will be the teacher. So you'll all be looking at the teacher, paying attention to the teacher, and paying really less attention to your classmates. So that's the students' perspectives. But you can also come to observe this class and observe it from a different perspective, meaning that of the teacher. So instead of being seated where the students are seated, you can be standing where the professor is standing. And you get a very different perspective of the class. So by doing that, you'll be dealing with teachers and students being part of this one culture, but you'll be recording their various perspectives. So what I want you to do in your own ethnographies is develop that skill. Learn to look from different perspectives, because the people of a subculture don't all have the same role, and you need to learn to look from all of their perspectives. Now on top of that, you also need to look from the insider and an outsider perspective. And as I talked about at the beginning, ethnography is not just about immersing yourself, it's also about learning to remove yourself from that process, to intellectualize what you see and hear, to make sense of it, to put it in perspective, and to write convincingly about it. So another technique that is very useful as an ethnographer and as somebody conducting observation is learning to maintain objectivity. So you've already written a paper called Positioning Yourself. And in that paper, all you had to do was to be aware of how you, the researcher, and the key instrument to your own research, because if you're conducting observation, it is coming through you. So you have to be aware of how you affect the research process. So you have to be aware of how your fixed positions, things like your ethnicity, things like your gender, things like your nationality, affect the way you see the world and consequently the way you're observing. You also have to be aware of how your subjective positions, like your life experiences, affect the research process. You also have to be aware of how your textual positions, meaning that the language you use, affect the way you talk about the world, you see the world. So all these things are related. So in ethnographic research, we talked about a kind of objectivity called intersubjectivity that you have to be able to reach by bringing together as many perspectives as possible. So that's one way to avoid that bias that your own person will introduce as part of the research process. So that's a very important skill to have, maintaining objectivity. So another skill you need to have as an ethnographer and as somebody conducting observation is having a good memory. So for this activity, I just call it building memory. And this is to be done individually. So as you walk past a store, you just walk past a store, you take a piece of paper and try to write down everything you've seen. And you go back to compare your list with what is actually there. So if you find out that you had most of the things that are actually there, it means that you have a good visual memory. And then if you feel like your list was not as complete as what is actually there, then that means that it is something, again, to work more on. So as an ethnographer and as somebody conducting observation, you will not always have the time to be taking notes. There will be situations where you just have to rely on your memory. So building that good memory would be an essential skill to have. Another skill you need to have as an ethnographer is maintaining naivete. So that's very important. So don't be the one observing, the one wanting to learn about the culture, and then the one feeling like you know everything. So if you have that kind of an attitude, people will not open up to you. You won't be able to discover as much as you actually wished. So you need to learn to maintain naivete. You need to play like, you need to play the role of a kind of like a naive person within the culture. So learn to show genuine interest in wanting to learn. So if people feel like you have that attitude, then they'll be able to open up to you. They'll be willing to teach you more about the culture. You are there to learn, not to show off. So make sure you maintain naivety all throughout. So as an ethnographer, again, it is important to have another skill, and this one now is learning to pay attention to insider language. So this should come naturally if you're an outsider, because whenever they use words or phrases or sentences a certain way, whenever they have these terms that you're not familiar with, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. You will have the opportunity to ask them, what do you mean by this? What does that mean? I see you use this word often. Like, what do you mean? So that's only when you'll be able to get to know really about like insider language. And reporting on insider language is one of the most important things you have to do when writing ethnographies. Okay, now I'll be talking about two techniques. So they are mostly note-taking techniques that can be very useful in helping you organize your field notes and also helping you write your observation papers. So a great ethnography basically. So the first note-taking technique is one that you will find in the book Field Working. So they have a double entry note-taking worksheet. So basically what that is a note-taking worksheet which is basically divided into two sections. So the first section, you have to write down exactly what you see. So this is, a recording exactly what you see, and then on the other side, you have to record how you react to what you see. So you have what you see and how you react to what you see. And now at the bottom, they have 3 columns where you are invited to analyze your field notes in terms of what surprised you, what intrigued you, and what disturbed you. Now, you will have a copy of that double entry note-taking worksheet, and I think it's a very useful one because it enables you to not only record what you see, but also your reactions to what you see. And in ethnographic research, both are important. So you need to tell the audience what you're seeing, but also how you're reacting to what you're seeing. So that makes your ethnographic account more complete. Okay. So the second technique, it still has to do with note taking, and I think this one will truly enable you to write a vivid ethnographic paper, a vivid observation paper, right? So I basically got this idea from reading a book titled Innovation Myth and Mythics. So it's an entrepreneurship book, more like a business type book, but I found the ideas they had there, some of the ideas very applicable to ethnographic research. So they have this concept that they call senspiration. So basically the way they define senspiration is, this angle takes a close look at the physical interface and experience a consumer has with a product or service and the emotions attached to that experience from a multisensory point of view. It can be very insightful to break down the experience consumers or customers have with a product by systematically considering how each of the senses is impacted by the offering. So basically they're looking at how companies can better design their product, taking into account all the senses, how the product affects all the senses. Now I think this is very important also in ethnographic research and while conducting observation and reporting about observation. So in your book, Field Working, one thing you've seen written there is that when you're reporting about observation, you have to be able to create what we called a sense of having been there. So a sense of place. When people read your observation paper, they have to be able to get that sense. They have to be able to visualize the place. But it's not just about visualizing the place. So that's just one aspect. So if we say visualize, we're only focusing on one sense. So I would actually invite you to pay attention to all your senses while taking notes. So you have to be able to take notes on touch. So how does your subculture feel like in terms of touch? So if you have the opportunity to touch anything within your subculture, try to record how that particular experience is like. So is it rough? Is it smooth, slippery, clean, fuzzy, moist, dry, hot, cold? So these are some of the things we tend to very easily not pay attention to, like when conducting observation. We tend to forget about touch. It's a very important sense to include. Smell. So again, here they say, smell. When talking about food, we understand that smell is an important and powerful part of our enjoyment and memory. Our brain stores the vivid memory of smell attached to the complete memory of places, people, events in our lives, and the emotions associated with them. So again, smell is very important. You step in a subculture, try to describe how the subculture smells like. If there are particular places, how do they smell like? Because people really care about that, and that will add sensory details to your description. So again, touch, smell, very important. Another one is taste. So here they say, if I'm a bank, what is my taste? Most of you probably imagine a Dum Dum lollipop based on childhood memory of having received one of them from the drive-thru teller. What if a bank offered its customer an elegant chocolate mint instead? Would that create an impression? I think so. So you have these companies try to make you taste something, because by tasting, let's say a chocolate, you would associate that particular taste to the experience you're having. So even if you're having a bad experience, maybe because you're tasting something good, it could reshape your experience in a different way. That's what I'm guessing, at least. So again, pay attention to taste. So that's another sense to pay attention to while providing details, description about the subculture. So now sight. Sight, of course, is the one most people would think of when they say describe a place or provide a description, right? So the sense of sight is often our first perception of the world around us, and as such, it influences and shapes how the rest of our senses respond. Chefs understand that we taste with our eyes, so the first impression of food is the first moment of truth that sets the tone for the taste and smell. Football coaches regularly say that they see better than they hear, and we all say that we believe it when we see it. So sight is certainly the most powerful of the sights, and as I said, it shapes all the rest of the senses. So again, in conducting observation, of course you have to look. We talked a lot about looking, but you also have to pay attention to details. Record everything you see in terms of frequency. So if you were conducting observation in this class, be able to name things. So name everything you see. So that's like paying attention to detail, something we talked about earlier. Okay. Now the last thing is sound. Now sound plays a very important role in most things. So in product design, for example, so I take this computer. If you start it, it has a particular sound. And even if you don't see the computer, and if I restart my computer right now, you would be able to recognize which computer started based on the sound. So what companies do is they have these unique sounds that are associated with their products. So whenever people hear the sound, they associate the sound with the product. So you know a number of products, to which particular sounds are associated. So again, the question you have to ask yourself while conducting ethnographies is, how would you describe your subculture in terms of sound? How does it sound like? Is it like a noisy place? How is the sound level like? What do we hear? Okay? And you need to have, of course, great adjectives, to be able to talk about these different things. So in terms of sight, as I said, you name everything you see. In terms of sound, how can you describe it? Think about adjectives. So here I have a number of them. Is it calm, tranquil, noiseless, musical, gentle, low pitch, soft, smooth, noisy, strong, pleasing, quiet, melodic, rhythmic, talkative, thundering, vociferous, speechless, silent, ear-splitting, harsh? So these are just adjectives to describe things related to sound. Okay? Is it white noise, etc.? Smell. Is it bitter, burning, choking, clean, delicious, fragrant, fresh, medicinal, musty, sour, smoky? You have a bunch of adjectives you can use to describe sound, smell. Taste. Is it acidic, bitter, cool, creamy, delicious, hot, juicy, mild, peppery? So one thing you will realize is that the adjectives used to describe taste are very similar to the adjectives used to describe smell. And I'm guessing the reason for this is because both senses probably affect each other. So touch, how does a place feel like? Breezy, bumpy, chilly, cold, cool, dirty, dry, dusty, elastic, filthy, frosty, hot, icy. So again, a bunch of adjectives. So you're thinking about this sight, name things, the rest of the senses, describe them using vivid adjectives. Now, as an ethnographer, and as somebody conducting observation, you will not always have months or years to spend observing. So because of that, some ethnographers have developed rapid assessment techniques. So some of those are participatory mapping, daily or seasonal calendar, and stereotype checklists. So what is participatory mapping? So basically what it is asking your informants, the insiders of a subculture, to draw a map of their field site and marking important places. So for example, I could implement the same activity here in class. So I imagine that most of you are here on campus, some of you live on campus, and campus is a very important place to you. So I will give you like pieces of paper, and ask you to draw a map of Ball State on it, and then you place important buildings, important things on the map. So by conducting this activity, one thing you'll be able to observe is that all of you will have a starting point. So what's your starting point on the map? Maybe that's a really important place. And you realize that your classmates will not be drawing from the same starting point. So some will start at the bell tower right here. Some others will start at their dorms. Some will omit complete sections of campus, and some will have like the whole campus. So it's very interesting to see how people draw these maps, and there is a lot of like a great learning potential from having people draw participatory maps. So that's one activity I would encourage you to do if you don't have the amount of time, if you don't have enough time to actually observe for long periods of time. Now, another activity that you could implement with insiders is called a daily or seasonal calendar. So what this basically consists of is asking insiders to tell you their daily routine. So some would say, I wake up at this time, this is the time I have breakfast, this is the time I have lunch, then I study at this time, then I go exercise at this time. So if you're able to ask about 10 participants within your subculture to tell you about their daily routines, you can then analyze it to see commonalities between them, and you'll be able to say, this is how people in this subculture go by daily. So that's some pretty insightful finding. You could also have a stereotype checklist. So basically with that one, you establish a list of suspected stereotypes that are associated to a particular culture, and you ask an insider to check which ones apply and which ones do not. So by doing that, you will actually be able to obtain some qualitative data, because at times they will be able to say, okay, this one applies, this one sort of applies but doesn't really apply, and this one doesn't apply. And they will really provide sometimes substantial explanations as to why something kind of fit but doesn't really fit. So it's always interesting to use these techniques to learn more about a culture, and I would strongly encourage you to make use of the techniques I just talked about. So with ethnographies and observation, they have a really great potential. They have some really good advantages, and some of them would be that, okay, if you're conducting observation, as I just talked about, you'll be able to collect all kinds of data, and that's important. So qualitative data and different kinds of data, so from naturalistic data to prompted production to prompted responses. You can collect all of these kinds of data while conducting observation. Another advantage of conducting observation is that it reduces the problem of reactivity. So if you immerse yourself long enough in the culture, people can be comfortable with you and they will react less to your presence, and that's a plus. So by that, it will also enable you to really ask sensitive questions that you wouldn't be able to ask, let's say, on a survey or using a different kind of research method. So because you were also the key instrument to your research and you were there during the data collection process, observation really allows you to talk about your data with confidence, and that's very important when you're reporting about research. So what I would encourage you is use all the techniques I talked about today. So from the skills that are needed to be a great observer, to the techniques that you can implement while observing, to the rapid assessment techniques that I talked about to conduct great observations.